Energy in My Building, How Does It Work, we primarily focused on the 3 ownership models within a building, which included Western Power meter ownership, complete scheme ownership, and part scheme, part third party ownership, including the implications this has on your purchasing arrangements. We also explored the need for schemes to better understand the limitations of their base load utility infrastructure and formulating a medium-term plan to help the scheme and owners accommodate the addition of sustainable infrastructure. In this info series, we explore what are the opportunities that exist for building owners and strata schemes to generate an income from the infrastructure they own. First, we'll look at how a utility is purchased, then what may influence the cost and how you can save money. Damien, how do strata schemes purchase electricity?
Okay, so the Electricity Act allows strata schemes under an exemption to not need an electricity licence to sell electricity. And as such, that gives them the power of choice to either purchase through the Western Power model, where the individual lots have their own account, or to purchase under the complete ownership structure, where the scheme manages the reading of the meter and the distribution of the energy bills to their own lot owners, or the third party ownership, the part ownership model, where a third party controls the billing process within those properties. But that power of choice is the key. The scheme can make the decision. They own the assets. They own that infrastructure ultimately. It's only unless they've been contracted differently to do that, where their hands are tied until those contract terms end.
Okay, and which is the cheaper option?
Well, with regards to the cheapest option, where there's the complete ownership model, as long as the scheme's gone out to the contestable market, that will prove to be the best option for owners.
Okay. And Damien, what model provides the scheme with the greatest control and opportunity for electricity savings?
Sure. Well, as a business, Energy Tech read and provide reports to hundreds of schemes and also commercial properties, over 2,000 in total. And by far, the complete ownership model derives the best savings or option to earn on-sell profits from their infrastructure, their energy infrastructure.
Okay, great. And tell me more about how much electricity a strata scheme needs to consume in WA to be eligible to purchase cheaper electricity.
Sure. So where a scheme consumes more than 50,000 kilowatt hours a year in total, they become eligible to purchase electricity within the deregulated energy market. 50,000 kilowatt hours, most homes might use between 6,000 and 10,000 kilowatt hours. So we're talking sort of 10 plus more like 20 apartment building clusters that would then make up enough energy whereas a collective, they're consuming enough electricity to become eligible to purchase electricity in that deregulated energy market.
Scott, what kind of savings are available?
So where the scheme owns the electrical infrastructure, it can achieve savings of around 25 to 30% on whole of site electrical costs when compared to a lot going direct under the A1 tariff rate.
And based on our data, that equates to around $480 as an average per lot per annum. If the property is configured as an embedded network and the costs of a lot owner, compared to a cost of a lot owner who has a direct arrangement with Synergy.
Okay, wow. That's a big saving. How else can the scheme benefit?
Well, I guess the real benefit is that the scheme has power of choice. So the scheme can either charge the lot at the A1 tariff rate while acquiring it at a 25 to 30% reduced rate, or it might pass on those savings directly through the utility bill or do a little bit of both. Traditionally, where you might see a higher investor market, a high tenant occupancy, the investor would prefer to see the on-bill rate at the A1 tariff rate, which they're entitled to charge, And those savings can be realised through the levy, because the levy, of course, is an on-bill to the tenant. So the investor can see those savings realised through the levy, and that can be used to offset the costs for maintaining the electrical infrastructure and other maintenance costs, and also could be transferred across to the reserve fund for the future upgrade of the scheme and accommodate more sustainable infrastructure.
So Scott, what about other utilities?
Well, there's also a competitive market for the provision of gas, and depending on how your building is set up, arguably telecommunications as well. And this is the benefit of living in strata. You're not just going to the market with the one lot or the one house. You're actually going to market with the whole scheme. And I would also recommend, don't just go with one utility, don't just take your electricity to market. As we mentioned in part one, most of your energy retailers will provide both electricity and gas. So bundle it up. But then even take it one step further and see if your strata manager has got a few other schemes that also at that tendering point, and bundle up a few schemes and take a few schemes to the market and seeing if you can get a more competitive rate for the consumer. So these are the real benefits which you can realise in strata. And the challenges with that though really come down to each energy retailer will provide a tender with a sort of a slightly different measurement. And I'm just a humble strata manager, and really trying to understand on-peak, off-peak variable rates and the times around that can become really challenging. So if you're really wanting to get the most competitive outcome, engaging someone like Energy Tech to help go through that procurement process for you and help provide those recommendations is what I would recommend.
Has COVID changed energy consumption trends?
Yes, it has. The shift to so many people working from home and heading back from out in the suburbs in many cases has had a huge impact. It means that the trend used to be that people would work in their workplace in the cities or in other areas, so they were travelling away from their premises. Now they're working from home, so especially within strata, consumption is high during the day and high at night. That's a very consistent energy load, whereas it used to be low during the middle of the day, and then people would come home, they'd have their meals and they'd turn all the appliances on, washing, all those various bits in the evenings, and then they'd go to bed and things would taper off until the morning, which would be another peak period. So that's having a huge impact on both making the strata industry an attractive electricity load for electricity retailers, because it's constant, and that's much more efficient to supply those entities versus properties that have a high load during the day and none at night, peak off peak. So that has a big implication on the procurement purchasing arrangements.
Right, so with these changes in energy consumption trends, what implications does that have for maintenance?
So with strata buildings, that puts the occupancy is just generally higher in these buildings. People are there a lot more than they used to be. So plant and equipment is running more than it used to. And so the life cycle of that plant and equipment, the air conditioning plant, the various other assets that are within the building are all operating for longer periods. They might have been more on a standby mode, for example, in the middle of the day, whereas now they're running. And that's where maintenance planning is critical, and accommodating that and having maintenance managers oversee that type of planning and the procurement of service providers to apply the appropriate planning. Services like an organisation like B Complex that actually set out those strategies and those plans to ensure that the life cycle of the asset is extended, not shortened from activities like what we're experiencing at the moment.
Okay, great. And what about water?
So water's different because under the state regulation, you can't on-sell water. You have to pass the costs through as they are, which means it's more about the user pays methodology again, where you really want people to pay for that water that they consume, and if Mr. Jones next door uses less than Mrs. Smith, Mr. Jones should pay more. That's not always the case. Metering infrastructure isn't always there for water like it is for electricity and gas. However, it is important that those costs are passed through at cost, but everyone, the end user, should pay.
Scott, previously you mentioned hot water. How does this work?
So a building or a scheme may actually have a central hot water system, which then may be submetered and measured on the provision to the individual lots as everyone steps in to have a hot shower. Effectively, though, there are several elements which contribute to the cost of provision of the hot water. You've got the water element, but which you can only on bill at the water corp rate, prescribed water corp rate. But you've also got the electricity costs or gas costs that may be incorporated in heating that water and pumping that water. You've also got the upkeep of the plant and equipment. You know, a central hot water system needs to be serviced a couple of times a year, and you've got the maintenance and replacement of that you need to consider. You've got the meter reading costs and the reconciling of that data, because it can get quite complex at times. And also other administration costs that might be incurred with regards to on-billing that to the individual lots. So this should all be considered when you're calculating the consumption cost for hot water. And this is what we alluded to in part 1 under your bylaw, and arguably passing a motion each year to give that transparency. Now, there's also another significant element that needs to be considered for new schemes, and that comes down to occupancy rates. And what you'll find is a lot of these central hot water plants are circulating systems. So you've got the hot water being generated by the central hot water system, and the water just circulates around the building, and as you need to have a hot shower, you're tapping into that and you're siphoning off the hot water. So the occupancy costs don't vary much between 60, 70% occupancy to 100% occupancy. And this is what needs to be considered when you have a new scheme coming online. And it also needs to be factored in for your central air conditioning plant, where a scheme might have central air conditioning plant. Again, can be a significant cost to individual lots if you've only got 20 or 30% occupancy in the building, because those 20 to 30% of the lots that might be occupying the building are paying the 100% operating costs of that central plant. So this is where you find a few owners, they move into a new scheme, they can't quite understand why is the hot water and the air conditioning costing them so much, and that's because they're paying the full costs of the operation of that plant. But as you increase the occupancy of the building and there's more people utilising the services, of course, that total operating costs are now being shared across a greater portion of the building, and just something that you need to be aware.
Yeah, right. So if the scheme is recovering the operating costs and potentially generating an income for the maintenance and future upkeep of these systems, are there any tax implications?
Yes. So effectively, the scheme is now, as you said, generating an income. And so that's non-mutual income. And as the scheme is getting non-mutual income, they're now obligated to ensure that they lodge business activity statements to the ATO. And further, the scheme may also need to consider issuing group certificates for the individual lots, because the scheme is now becoming an additional income generator for those investors that might own within the building as well.
In conclusion, in this info series, we've investigated how a scheme may negotiate the acquisition of their utility, how they on-sell the utility, and factors that need to be considered when tendering that may influence the procurement process. In part 3, we will investigate how to convert from a Western Power metered direct scenario to an embedded network, and multiple other sustainable initiatives and challenges.